Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Another alteration job today, and this one is another hem. I have a pair of ladies' slacks here. They need to be taken up by one hem length, and they are a lined pair of pants as well. So I've essentially got two pairs of pants to take up at once. They're going to have a couple of different techniques. One you've already seen in a previous hem, but I'm going to show you quickly how I go about shortening a pair of ladies' trousers. Okay, the customer has marked a pin in the area where she wants the hem finished. So we need to bring it up by around about that much. Now, unfortunately for me, because it takes longer, this hem only needs to come up not even one hem length, which is a pain because I now have to undo this row of stitching all the way around so that I can actually start taking my measurements and redo the hem. So what I do when I'm undoing stitches, I will go in and carefully undo a couple of stitches. And this is very lightweight fabric, so I've got to be really careful not to tear the fabric as I'm undoing the stitches. So I've made an opening here, and I'm going to take a pair of scissors and start opening up the hem underneath. Now I'm just taking, you want to take sharp scissors because otherwise you're going to chew through your fabric or through your thread. Fingers underneath, pinky on top, and just take one blade, place it between the layers and start gliding in between the layers of fabric there. And you want to do that very gently so that you don't pull or rip the fabric underneath. I'm just going to mark that pin in the top layer. You can use a smaller blade or scissors if you want to, or even a razor blade, but it needs to be sharp. I'm trying to do this with my thread snips. The blade's just not sharp enough, and it's going to force me to put more pressure on the thread. I will then actually tear the fabric. So that's why I'm using these ones. They're my sharpest scissors. And I'm just going gently. I can go to the trouble of unpicking all of the stitches individually. It just takes longer. I can also use my seam ripper with a blade underneath, but again, you want to make sure it's a really sharp blade. But because this fabric is so light, it's actually safer for me to do this than it is to use my seam ripper. And what I mean with my seam ripper is that I have a little ball on the end here that will sit underneath the layer of fabric, and I'll be pushing that ball along, and the blade inside the seam ripper here is what is going to cut those threads. But I find I have less control over what happens with the layer of fabric underneath whilst I'm using this. If it were a heavier fabric, I'd have no problems. But because this is such a lightweight fabric, I'm going for the big guns. A razor blade will be just as efficient. I just don't have any around at the moment. Now to pick up any excess thread, I just use some masking tape or sticky tape. And I'll wrap it around my fingers. So I've got the sticky side to the outside. So that's the sticky side. And then I'll just run the masking tape along the area where I've got any loose threads sticking out. It's just a quicker way to remove all of those loose threads, and you don't have thread sitting all over the floor and all over the bench. You want to get a really nice tacky tape. This is where the customer wants her hem finished, at that length there. We've got all this excess to play with. Her finished hem was 1 3/8 of an inch or 3.5 centimetres. So what I will do is from the position of the pin, that marking for the hem, so this area where the pin is, I'm going to place my line, my gauge over there, and mark the 3.5 centimetres or 3/8 of an inch, which is just on that fold line of the previous seam. When these pants were constructed, they had a small 1/2 inch hem and then this larger hem. I don't like to waste my time taking two different measurements on the same pair of pants, on the same leg. So what I'm going to do instead is just create a double folded hem. So what that means is that this whole amount of fabric here, that's going to be folded in half, and then that is going to be folded in half again, and the hem will be where the pin is. You have a nice neat edge. It just means that all I have to trim off on these pants is that initial 1/2 inch hem. Now, I learnt the hard way some time ago not to cut the front and back layers of my fabric at the same time. I actually had some excess fabric underneath one time, and I completely ruined the hem of a pair of pants. So when I'm working with fabric like this, it's different if it's jeans or something heavier, but when I'm working with fabric like this, I work on one layer at a time. It does take me a little bit more time, but I know that I'm not actually going to make any mistakes. At least I hope not. When I put my scissors down, I will also make sure that the blades are closed on my scissors. So I'll always close my blades. I won't leave them open like this. That was another lesson I learned back in high school. I'd made this beautiful blouse, accidentally left my scissors open and came back, knocked them, and I snipped a hole in the yoke of my blouse. And because of it, the teacher gave me less marks. And I've never been able to let it go. So I always make sure that my scissors are completely closed when they leave my hand. So that's the first part of the hem, ready to be measured and folded up. The job's been made really easy for me here because I've already got the crease in place from the original hem. So for me, all I have to do is fold along that, and then I'm going to fold directly underneath and have a nice straight hem. But what you would do if you didn't have that luxury is whatever your hem is supposed to be, so say the first fold will be up at the 1.5 inches if that's what your hem was, and then the second fold will be 1.5 inches again. I would reposition the pins, make sure you line up the side seam with the existing side seam. So for these ones here, all I have to do is that fold needs to go up to the stitching line, and I can actually see the stitching line on these pants. I'll put my pins in from the outside edge in, because when I'm sewing I'll be able to see the hem there, and I can just pull my pins out on the side. So I'll always line up the side seams first, and make sure the edge of the seam there matches up. And then I can pin the rest. Okay, so I've pinned the hem all the way around. Now, I'm not sure if I mentioned these pants are lined. So you can see that I've taken up the hem on the outer fabric, but the lining is hanging down quite a bit. When you take up the outer fabric, you'll take up the lining by the same amount. Because my outer fabric is 1.5 inches shorter than it originally was, I need to apply the same to the lining. Even though the lining has only a very small hem, it's only 3/8 of an inch wide or 1 centimetre, I still need to apply the same hem, but I need to take off the same amount that I've taken off the front. So to mark that, I'll just get some chalk, mark that 1.5 that I've taken off the original hem. This will be my finished hem length. So that line I've just marked here is my finished hem length. In a video I just did a couple of weeks ago, I showed you how I stay stitch the bottom edge of the fabric, because this is a really lightweight, it might be a voile or a lawn, even if it's a silky thin lining fabric, I'll do the same thing. I've got 2 folds of 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So this bottom line here is my cutting line, and halfway between those lines I'm going to have a stitching line. So it'll just be a stay stitched line. I'll stitch this line of stay stitching so that I don't stretch out the fabric, and it'll make it easier for me to do a double fold. Okay, I have marked and pinned both legs on the outside pants. I've marked the reference lines that I need for the lining part of the pants. I'm going to take this to the machine now, and I'm going to sew the outer pants right along the very edge. I'm using a longer stitch length of about 3.5, and the needles I'm using are number 80 or a size 12. Don't worry about the DB1, that's for an industrial machine, but you want to get a number 80 or a 12 for your type of machine. Because this is a lighter weight fabric, I'm going with a lighter gauge needle, and I'll use the same needle for the lining. Once I've sewn the hem for the main pants, I'm then going to, from that bottom line there, I'm going to sew 1 centimetre up, and that's going to be my stay stitching or guideline for when I fold the fabric up later. Did I mention that so far it's taken me about 12 minutes for each side, so 24 minutes to hem 4 pieces of fabric, and that's the cutting so far as well, the hemming and the pinning and the measurements. I'm starting here on the inseam. To start sewing, I'm going to be starting on the inseam, which is the inside leg, so you're better off starting with your back stitch somewhere on one of the side seams. And I'm sewing right at the very top edge of the fold, about 1/8 of an inch in from the top. You'll also notice that I'm not pushing or pulling the fabric as it's going through the machine. I'm allowing the fabric to be fed through by itself. All I'm doing is steering. And I'll repeat that for the other leg. I'm also sewing the pants inside from the inside as well. So at the moment I've got the inside of the pants here. That hem is folded up and I can see everything faced up. Now, I haven't been sewing over the pins. The ones that you see left in there, they just weren't in the way. Because this is such a wide hem, the needle doesn't go all the way to the end where I'm sewing. Now I'm ready to do the lining, and it just so happens that the stitching line that I need just happens to line up perfectly on my 3/4 inch line on my stitch plate. So I'm going to use that 3/4 inch line on my plate to run the edge of the fabric along and give me a nice straight stitch. This stitching line that I'm doing is really just so that I can find my fold position and also to prevent the fabric from stretching out and fraying. When I'm sewing, I'm not actually watching my needle go up and down because that's going to make me go crooked. I'm watching the guidelines that I'm looking for. So I'm actually looking over here to sew. And that's where I'm guiding my fabric. And before I do anything else, I'll repeat that for the other side. Okay, the outer hem is done and all I need to do is press both of them. The lining hems now, I've done the stay stitching. I need to trim it back and then I need to do a double fold. So if you remember the outer yellow line that I've got here, that's now my cutting line. So I can go and cut this off. My stitching line is along here. I've trimmed off the bottom of the hem. Now I need to fold the fabric right on that stitching line. We did this in a shirt video the other day. So where that stitching line is, it's going to stop my fabric from stretching. I usually do this whilst I'm over at the machine. So that will set a crease on that row of stitching that I've done, and then I will fold that up to this line here, which is the finished hem length. So that's my double fold now. That stitching line or that stay stitch is sitting right on the top edge, and then I can sew along here. So we'll take this to the machine now and sew right along the top edge there, and I'm just going to fold the fabric over as I'm stitching. So before I start, I'm just going to finger press the crease in place, get myself ready, fold it over again, place it under my machine and hold my fingers on either side, and then I'm ready to start sewing. Doing the hems like this gives me so much more control over the fabric, and I don't have pins or clips distorting the fabric as I'm going around. I also save loads of time by not having to pin and measure. And that's it, my hems are completely finished. Now all I need to do is go and iron all of the legs. So there we go, finished hems on the slacks for this customer. And the amount of time that it took me was about 55 minutes, 50 to 55 minutes. That included the ironing as well. So that was the measuring, the pinning, the cutting, the sewing, all of that involved was 50 to 55 minutes. Normally for a pair of pants with a wide hem like this, if it's just a single hem, I will charge $20 a pair. Now these are Australian rates as well. So I'll charge $20 for a pair of hem lengths when it's just a single pair. When they're lined, it's usually double. These ones are going to be $40 because I've done the lining as well as the hem. So $40 is what the lady's going to get charged for doing this hem. Works out about right as well because my hourly rate is $45. They've taken me just under an hour. So my hourly rate, or the equivalent of 2 pairs of hems, works out the same. So $40 for a pair of slacks. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you want to see more alterations, let me know. I get lots of them, so I can keep them coming. Most of what I do are hems though. Anyway, I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.